Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and welcome everyone to Best Practices for Survey Implementation, Encouraging Participation, even in a Pandemic. My name is John McMahon. I am a product specialist, as they said in my introduction, with the Wellbeing Index. And today we're going to be talking about, survey implementation and how you can still do that well and still get those important surveys out. Even during this time where everything's kind of up in the air and everybody's remote and there's a lot of challenges and struggles. So I'm a product specialist with the Wellbeing Index. That's kind of where most of my experience lies. I've helped over 50 organizations roll out the Wellbeing Index. We have over 600 organizations that use the Wellbeing Index worldwide. I've helped both during and prior to the pandemic, so I've seen the differences. I've had some experience working with groups and kind of working through what's been going on with the pandemic. But I also have some experience on surveys, both one-time surveys and longitudinal surveys, working at the Survey Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So a little bit more background about the Wellbeing Index really quick, just because this is kind of the lens where a lot of my examples and things that we'll be talking about today, this is what it's going to be kind of focused around. So it's a quick 7 or 9 question assessment invented by the Mayo Clinic. Dr. Lottie Derby and Dr. Tate Shanafelt at the Mayo Clinic were the inventors of the Wellbeing Index. And it goes beyond burnout, and it measures 6 dimensions of distress and well-being. This is used by both individuals and organizations. So we kind of have 2 different main audiences that we're looking at, which again will be important as we talk about some of these other pieces. And then, it's really used in this case to improve well-being. This is something that we obviously are very focused on prior to the pandemic, and even more so now during and coming out of the pandemic, being concerned with individual well-being and how people are going to be feeling and how they're going to be doing once all is said and done. So what are some of the impacts of COVID, right? I mean, threw everybody for a loop. It delayed a lot of the rollouts for this. I'm sure it's delayed a lot of initiatives at your own workplaces. Obviously, it required the full attention and all of the resources that could be brought to bear for it. A lot of resources were taken from other places, whether that's monetary resources or individual personnel that have been moved and shifted around. A lot of our hospital partners were converting beds to ICU units and things and trying to ramp up ventilators and PPE and all of that kind of stuff. And so, obviously that throws a wrench in everybody's plans, makes it difficult to communicate. Everybody's remote now. Everything's changing. With communications, how the operations work, everybody's personal lives have changed. Kids are, homeschooled and all of that kind of stuff. People are just feeling overwhelmed. And so that's the world we find ourselves in right now. But the good news is that is changing. So organizations are kind of getting back into a sense of a routine. It's not normal per se, but there's new communications, processes and things that are being developed, new work practices that are being developed. People are learning how to work and adapt to the current situation. In a lot of areas, cases are stabilizing. Obviously, we're still seeing some spikes in different things, but we're starting to get a better understanding of just what the pandemic is, or what COVID, what the virus and things are, how to treat them, that type of thing. And so it's making things a little bit more stable right now, which is great. And it's more important again now than ever to really start, or hopefully continue, if you've already started one, wellness efforts, getting those feedback surveys, whether it's provider feedback surveys, and those types of things, and really start to focus your efforts there, because that's going to be a key again in the next coming weeks, months, and years. So how are we going to do that? That's really what we're talking about today, is how do we do this? And so our 3 main takeaways, or our 3 keys to success, if you want to think of it this way, are your goals, motivations of your audience, and your tactics, which are the kind of nuts and bolts of how to do the survey rollout. If you want to think of this as kind of a triangle, your goals are going to be at the bottom. It's that base of your triangle. That's really what is going to kind of inform everything else. Then the next level there would be the motivations. If you understand what motivates your audience, you'll be able to better roll out the survey. You'll be able to better present the information to try to get a good response. And then lastly are the tactics. Those are the things you're actually going to do, things you're actually going to put into play as you roll out your survey. So starting with goals, really big here communication, right? Make sure everybody is on the same level of agreement with your goals. Stephen Covey said, start with the end in mind. This is the end. This is what you want to get out of the survey. And it's not just a response rate. Everybody has a goal for a response rate. Everybody would love to get 100% response rate, but that just doesn't happen. And obviously the higher response rate you can get, the better. You want to make sure that you're trying to get a good sampling of whatever target population you're reaching. But at the same time, if you know what your goals are, if you're looking for specific pieces of information, if you're certain things that you're trying to learn, if you can nail some of those other goals down, you don't necessarily need a 90% response rate to hit those goals. You might even be able to hit them with a 30 or 40% response rate if that group is representative of your organization or whatever group that you're measuring as a whole. And so knowing what those goals are, looking a little bit deeper than just saying we want a 90% response rate, can really help as you're designing your survey, as you're thinking about what questions you're going to ask, or if you've already kind of got that all taken care of and you're just thinking about how are we going to actually roll this out with a group. And so again, really vital that all key stakeholders are aware of these goals and are agreeing on these goals, because it's very easy to report back to leadership and say, oh, we had 90% response rate. But if you have them agree to some of these other deeper questions, then you don't necessarily need to rely on that response rate again. So once you've got your goals set, that's when you're going to kind of have that baseline, and you're going to want to move on to the motivations of your audience. Now we're starting to talk again about, okay, we have our goals. How are we going to reach them? What are we going to do? How do we reach the audience? How do we motivate our audience? And it's really important to think about the two different types of motivation. You have intrinsic motivation, which is kind of that internal reward. A lot of times the action itself, so in this case, taking the survey, is the reward, drives the satisfaction. You also have extrinsic motivators. So these are things like incentives and different things that way, where the action is performed either to get a reward or in some cases to avoid a punishment. So if you have the survey that you're sending out and it's required and it's part of their job review or part of their curriculum if they're a student or a resident or something of that nature, that can all factor into this as well. And so, it's really important to kind of understand the differences between those. Extrinsic motivators typically work really well for like one-off surveys and things. With the well-being index, it's more of a longitudinal survey. It's meant to be taken over time. It's meant to be taken multiple times by the individuals. For the organizations, they're going to want to do reassessment campaigns every so often, whether it's 6 months or 12 months or however long it works for their organization. And so if you focus solely on extrinsic motivators, studies have shown that that can actually reduce effectiveness over time. Eventually, whatever that reward that they're getting or punishment that they may be avoiding becomes more of a tedious thing than actually having an intrinsic motivation where they want to participate. And so we're going to talk about the way that that works a little bit too here coming up, and discuss why it works. Now, both can be a good piece of the puzzle, but it's really important to understand the two of them and understand which one might be more effective or what kind of balance of them might be more effective for your survey. So looking at intrinsic motivators, why do people want to participate? When I was working at the Wisconsin Longitudinal Study, when I was at the University of Wisconsin Survey Center, that was a study that started in 1957, and it talked to all of the seniors in Wisconsin, senior graduating class of Wisconsin high schools in 1957. They were given a survey. And then it followed those people for almost 50 years of their life. When I was doing the survey, it was in 2004. The last round of surveys were done in 2006 for that study. And so when I was talking to people, they've been followed for a very long time. They've been asked multiple questionnaires and done different interviews and surveys and things over the course of that time period. And what we found, my colleagues and I at the Survey Center, as we were interviewing these people and conducting the surveys and things, is that the people that stayed on for that long and participated fully in the surveys all across the board didn't do it because they were getting, money or anything. There was no, reward that way. It was, they felt like they were part of something bigger. They felt, special or honored to be part of a first of its kind study. This is the first study that really followed a single group of people for that long. They felt like they were doing something important. And so there are these internal motivators, these intrinsic motivators to get them to participate. And that's what carried them through that length of time and that length of study. So when you look at your studies and you look at your surveys that you're doing and those types of things or your assessments, what interest is going to pique, what's going to pique your interest for your group? Um, are they going to feel like there's some kind of benefit that they'll get? We know from different studies, Dr. Shanafelt, who was one of the creators of the Wellbeing Index, also did a research with some colleagues, and they found that what physicians and caregivers are really looking for is that they want to feel seen, heard, and valued by their organization. We have a blog post on that on the Wellbeing Index blog if you want to go check it out and kind of look more into that. But the idea is if you can get people to understand what the benefit to them is, that, hey, we're listening to you and you have a chance to kind of understand and help direct the organization and which direction we're going in and how we can make your work life better. That can be a very big intrinsic motivator to get people into doing the survey and to participating. Also, with the Wellbeing Index, just taking the index, measuring their well-being over time, looking for those peaks and valleys, accessing the resources that are available to them through the Wellbeing Index, those types of things are also benefits that can lead to them maybe feeling better, or they'll learn something about themselves, or those types of things. And so we see for all of our groups, when we have people come back and take the survey over and over again and reassess, that core group that reassess, it's because they're interested. It's because internally they want to do this. They're interested in doing this. They're interested in tracking it. And so if you can tap into those different motivations, it can be really, really powerful. So let's look at some extrinsic motivators. Why are some other reasons that people participate? Incentive programs are a big one. One of our top performers has over 90% participation, and they use a monetary incentive. They pretty heavily monetary, incentivize it every quarter. They take multiple reassessments per quarter. They're eligible for that quarter's incentive. And so that can really work well. That definitely can be a good thing to get people to do it. But at the same time, as I said, we have seen instances where that's kind of had a law of lessening returns, kind of like hedonic adaptation, which is something that Laurie Santos talks about in her Yale course, The Science of Wellbeing. She talks about how things we think make us happy don't necessarily make us happy, because as soon as we get them, whether it's a new car or a raise or a new job or whatever that incentive is that we're shooting for, we adapt to that. That becomes our new normal, and all of a sudden it's not enough anymore. Now we need more. And so that kind of keeps driving us forward to get more and more and more. And so that happens sometimes when you're doing a longer survey and you're trying to incentivize a survey over time. Those incentives become less and less of a motivator. They become less and less, where at first it's like, oh, sweet, I got a $10 Starbucks gift card to do this, and it took 5 minutes of my time. That's worth it. Well, over time, it's like, oh man, I got to do this again. Yeah, I'm going to get a gift card for it, but do I really need another gift card, and that kind of thing? And all of a sudden, no, it's not that big a motivation anymore, and you start losing some of that participation. So there are different ways, that you can use extrinsic motivators. Tying it in, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to our tactics, but tying into bigger, wellness initiatives and different things, or larger initiative, can really help. And the other thing with this, and one of the challenges with these extrinsic motivators too, is that the pandemic has really increased the pull on resources and things. And so there may just not be as many resources available to your group right now to kind of do some of these other incentives and different extrinsic motivating kind of things. And so again, if you can look at some of those intrinsic motivators, that typically, because it's self-driven, isn't going to cost a whole lot in terms of resources. And that can really be a helpful change there as well. So let's talk about tactics. This is where we're getting into the nuts and bolts now. We're getting into the nitty gritty, really going to talk about what can we do to drive our surveys forward, or our assessments forward. How can we drive that participation? And again, just to remember and kind of recap a little bit, it's really important to have your goals clearly stated right now. Make sure that everybody's on the same page that way. It's also really important to understand kind of hopefully a little bit about what's motivating your participants and your audience that you're reaching out to, whether those are, if you're going to do some kind of, incentive program or use any extrinsic motivators, what those are going to be, how it's going to be implemented, how you're going to do that. And also hopefully have a little bit of insight on some of the intrinsic motivators, some of the internal motivations that might help your group. So let's talk about some of the tactics, some of the things that work really well for our clients with the well-being index that I've worked with, and they can also be applied again to your surveys here. So direct ask, obviously really difficult right now with COVID and people not getting face-to-face meetings and that type of thing. But this can definitely be effectively used in a virtual environment as well. So you can do virtual meetings with groups, and I know people, have a love-hate relationship with Zoom and other meeting programs, but it really can be effective. Typically, again, these have been done face-to-face. But the important thing to think about when you're thinking about a direct ask and having a meeting with individuals to make the ask of them to take the survey or the assessment that you're doing is that it's signaling that it's worth the time and the effort. You're actually willing to spend time to talk to them about it and encourage them to take it. That's powerful. That really helps motivate people and say, okay, yeah, this isn't just like somebody threw a piece of paper at me and said, hey, can you do this when you get 5 minutes? It's important. We're taking time. You can build the survey or the assessment that you want them to take into that meeting. So with a lot of our groups, they'll have a wellness meeting and they'll be talking about maybe their larger wellness initiative or whatever it might be. They'll talk about the well-being index as part of that. And then we make it possible through the use of QR codes and things for them to put up a QR code and say, hey, let's take 5 minutes right now. Everybody take out your phone, scan that QR code, and you can take the assessment right now. We'll all take 5 minutes and do it right now. And that has been incredibly effective for our groups. So if you have some way to build the survey or the assessment right into the meeting, they're already in there. They're not doing anything else with that time. And so hopefully you can get some increased participation that way. And these are really effective things to do for like med student groups and the resident groups that we work with. They do it with their first years during orientation, super effective. We had a new medical school that was brand new last year. They've now gone through 2 classes. And out of their 2 classes, they have had 113 out of 120, or no, 117 out of 120 of their students have signed up and taken the well-being index at least once. So they really just knocked it out of the park with that. We have another resident group that did it. They had an incoming class this year. They had 80 incoming residents. They had 2 groups of 40. And over 2 orientation meetings where they split the groups in half, they had 79 out of the 80 of them sign up and assess in those meetings. So again, it can be very, very effective, especially if you can get them to assess during that time. And this typically is something that's going to be easier for smaller groups. We have larger groups that roll out, and obviously it's harder to get larger groups together in a meeting like this. But if you can break those larger groups down into smaller groups, and we'll kind of talk about that in a minute here as one of our tactics, that can really be an effective way to do it. We actually have a group that's going to be rolling out to their entire organization, but they're rolling out on a department by department basis rather than releasing it to everybody at once. And so it's really going to be interesting to see the first group that I know of that's done that this way. It's going to be really interesting to see how that works out, how that affects the overall participation. But direct asking can be an absolute game changer when it comes to getting participation in your survey. So our next thing we're going to talk about is getting buy-in. And this is really not only about buy-in from the people participating, but buy-in from local leadership. So again, if you're in a larger group, or even if you're just at like a large hospital, rather than having a survey or an assessment come out from a CMO or chief wellness officer or the CEO of the hospital or whatever it might be, those are people that, while it's important to know that they are involved and that they are knowledgeable about this and they're backing this, most individuals don't have a direct relationship with that person, right? They don't talk to them on a daily basis. They don't necessarily have direct accountability to that person. And so it's really going to be important to get their local leadership and supervisors involved, to get any peers that are involved. If they have peer leaders or influencers, people that are typically mentors or looked up to by their colleagues, getting them involved can be really, really powerful as well, because then you have people that your participants talk to every day, encouraging them to take the survey or to take the assessment. And that can be very, very powerful indeed. During COVID too, this is another great tactic right now, because those tight relationships, the mentor-mentee relationships, those, again, kind of peer leaders, those are the people that are being turned to on a day-to-day basis during the pandemic. People are looking to their supervisors or looking to those other leaders for direction and for help and assistance and those types of things and guidance during this time. And so getting them involved in your survey process can be a very powerful thing. One good way to do that is to pilot your survey. Find those individuals, identify those individuals. You typically know who they are. If you don't necessarily know who some of those peer leaders are, talk to the supervisors, because the supervisors will know. And then target those people and pilot the survey to those people directly, and get them involved first. And then once they've taken the survey and things, get their feedback, and then talk to them and say, hey, we appreciate that you took this. We hope that you got, value out of it. Maybe ask them what kind of value they got out of it, and then ask them and encourage them to share with their colleagues and to encourage their colleagues to participate once it goes live to everybody. So next, we're talking about tying it in. So this again is where we're talking about tying it into a larger initiative. This is some place where the incentive programs can really come into play, in some of those kind of extrinsic things that we were talking about. Talk about how whatever survey or whatever assessment that you're doing is part of a larger initiative. Help people understand, how does it benefit them? Are they able to take this survey, and that's going to help, again, guide the direction of that initiative. With the Wellbeing Index, a lot of people are using this, a lot of our partners are using this as part of a larger wellness program. And so by taking the Wellbeing Index and having some of the built-in feedback questions with the Wellbeing Index that are available and some of those types of things, they can let their individuals know, hey, we need the feedback from you so that we know what direction to take our wellness programs. Or we have these wellness programs already running. We need to know from you. We want to know from you, which ones are working, which ones you find valuable, and which ones we should maybe do away with or change. And so they can do that with the Wellbeing Index, in addition to obviously having the individual benefits of measuring their wellness on a regular basis, and the organizational benefits of being able to kind of track the overall well-being of their organization. This also is a great way to get creative with those incentives. So again, looking at the well-being side of things, a lot of our groups have well-being programs that they run, and they have these initiatives that they're already doing. And so when they are doing the incentive programs, they're tying it in directly to those larger programs. So maybe they have a wellness program where you can earn points for different things for the wellness. And then you can take the Wellbeing Index, and that goes towards earning those points. And so that can really be helpful as well. Next up, close the loop. This is really, really important, right? This is a big piece of the puzzle here. Generating two-way communication can really help with your surveys. Using them as a means to generate that two-way communication can really encourage people to take the surveys. Again, we know from different studies and things, and from that study that Dr. Shanafelt and his colleagues put out there, that providers in particular in the healthcare industry want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to feel like the organization cares about them. And so having this two-way communication opened up, using your surveys for that, can really go a long way. We have a partner group that we work with the Wellbeing Index, where during the COVID pandemic, what they have done is their chief wellness officer and their chief medical officer have gotten together on a weekly basis and done a Zoom meeting where any staff of the hospital can join that Zoom meeting. They'll get an update on kind of where things stand with patient load, where things stand with their PPE levels, kind of what's going on, and just get a status update of what's going on at the hospital. But then they've also opened it up and taken questions. And so people are able to ask, hey, what's going on with this initiative? Or, I have my kids at home because school is closed and they have to homeschool. What's the best way? Are there supports that we have for that? And those types of things, and they're asking questions. And having that two-way communication has really been helpful. It's allowed their organization to feel more connected. But they've also gotten a ton of feedback from individuals saying, hey, I really appreciate this. This really makes me feel like this organization cares about me as a person, as an individual, not just as one random faceless employee. So that's a way that kind of closing that loop can really help. Part of this is being transparent. You need to be transparent as possible with these things. That really helps too. And so when we get feedback from surveys, a lot of the time when we get pushback, it's because people say, oh, nobody looks at this anyway, or nobody's going to do anything with this. And so if you can be transparent and say, hey, here's what we're seeing, here's what we're planning to do based on the information that we gathered during the survey and those types of things, that can go a super long way to encouraging people not only to participate in the survey if you give them updates while the survey is open, but also if it's something like the Wellbeing Index where you're going to be doing this on a regular basis, or maybe it's an annual or semi-annual provider well-being survey or provider feedback survey, letting them know that, hey, if you answer this survey, we're going to take that into account when we make our plans moving forward for how we're going to run things. So that transparency is a big issue. And yes, things are going to change. Things always change. Things like COVID come out of nowhere and, you know, smack us, and we have to figure out how we're going to deal with it. And that's okay. That's going to happen. And that's where transparency can come through too. If you say you're going to do something and you don't follow through with it, that's where you get a lot of that negative feeling of nothing's going to change, nobody's listening, nobody's going to do anything with it. But if something changes and you can't follow through the way you had initially said you were going to or thought you were going to, if you're open and transparent and say, hey, something changed, or this is what changed, we can no longer do this, or we're not going to be doing this now, we're going to switch and do this other thing, that can be very, very effective, very helpful, help build that trust level, which again, the more people trust the organization that's giving out the survey or giving out the assessment, the more they trust that they're being listened to and that there are going to be actions taken based on the feedback they give, the more likely they are to participate now and in the future. So to review really quickly, 1, know your goals. That's your baseline. You have to be clear on your goals, whether it's your goals for participation or hopefully going deeper than that, what your goals are for the survey, what kind of information you want to get, what you're trying to learn, those types of things. Making sure that everyone who is a part of the survey is in on those goals, is in agreement with those goals, is all on the same page. 2, know what motivates your audience, right? Get those motivators, whether it's intrinsic motivations, whether it's extrinsic motivations, incentives, and different things that you're going to do, do those, put those out there, know those, know how you're going to balance them, know what you're going to do. And then 3, your tactics. Know what the tactics that you're going to use to best reach your audience are. The things we've gone over today have worked really well for our partners with the Wellbeing Index. They can absolutely be things that you can use in your own surveys, but you know ultimately your audience the best. Talk to your supervisors, talk to your local leadership, get a feel for what's going to work. And even within groups at your own organization, some things may work well, some things may not. You just have to kind of have a feeling out of what's going to work, but know that then, and then know what tactics you're going to use and follow through. So final thought, communication really is the key. And it really is, having all of those 3 kind of keys that we were talking about, the common thread that runs through all of them is communication, making sure everybody's on the same page with the goals, talking to supervisors and trying to understand the motivations for your particular audience that you're going to be doing the survey for, understanding what's going to get people to take that and being clear on that and communicating with that, and then communicating that to your audience, knowing, hey, this is going to motivate you if you know that we're going to take action on it and we're going to be listening to you and we care about you. Communicating that to them in an effective way, and that's where the tactics come in, and also knowing what tactics are going to work the best and following through with those. So that's kind of what you can do and kind of the best ways, some of the best practices that we have with the Wellbeing Index for putting out a survey and getting participation even during the COVID-19 pandemic. I appreciate you spending your time with us and learning about this with me. You have my contact information there. I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to ask. So thank you again for attending. Enjoy the rest of the summit.